He knew this letter would come back to bite someone. Before Zach Brown wrote a single word of that open letter, Alan Permane already had the whole timeline sitting in his head. Every date, every phone call, every gardening leave clause. And when Brown decided to send that letter straight to the FIA president instead of picking up the phone, he handed Permane exactly the opening he needed. You've probably seen the headline by now. Racing Bull's boss claps back at Zach Brown. But that's not the real story here. The real story is what happens after a rival team owner writes directly to the sport's governing body, and the governing body actually starts listening. Keep that name in mind, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, because he comes back into this before we're done. If you want the stories the paddock doesn't put in the press releases, subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from. Because the way this one plays out depends a lot on which side of this rivalry you've been rooting for. Here's where it starts. For months, Zach Brown has been building a case. His argument, in short, is that Racing Bulls doesn't operate as an independent Formula One team. He says it functions as a satellite operation for Red Bull, and he says that arrangement damages the sporting integrity of the entire grid. That's not a small accusation. That's the kind of claim that, if proven, could force real regulatory consequences. So in the spring, Brown didn't go through the usual channels. He didn't request a private meeting. He wrote an open letter addressed to FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem, and it leaked to the media almost immediately. Whether that leak was intentional or not, you can draw your own conclusion. But once it was public, it stopped being a private grievance. It became a campaign, and here's the part that matters. Brown didn't just make a vague accusation about team independence, he got specific. He referenced the 2024 Singapore Grand Prix, where Racing Bulls driver Daniel Ricciardo pushed for the fastest lap point, despite running well outside the points himself. That fastest lap took a point away from Lando Norris, who was fighting Max Verstappen for the championship at the time. Brown's implication was clear. Racing Bulls wasn't racing for itself, it was racing for Red Bull. Then he went further. He brought up Miami this past May, where Racing Bulls driver Liam Lawson was instructed to let Verstappen through at the start, even though Verstappen appeared to have forced him off the track to get there. Another data point, another suggestion that the two teams operate as one. And then came the part that turned this from a sporting argument into a personnel argument. Brown raised the recruitment pipeline between the two teams. When Christian Horner was sacked last year, Laurent Mekies stepped into the Racing Bulls team principal role with immediate effect. And an engineer named Andrea Landi made a move from Racing Bulls to Red Bull Racing, a switch that Brown alleged happened without an appropriate gardening leave period. Landi's move was announced in April, ahead of a July start date, which brings us to the phone call that never happened. Alan Permane went on F1's Beyond the Grid podcast, and he didn't hold back. He said he understood why Brown is fighting this battle. He even said, quote, "He's not fighting us, of course, he's fighting with Red Bull." That's an important distinction. Permane isn't pretending this is personal between him and Brown. He's saying Racing Bulls is collateral in a bigger war, but then Permane got specific, and this is where it gets interesting. He said the letter contained inaccuracies, not disagreements, inaccuracies. He said Brown's claim that Racing Bulls staff were leaving with minimal or no notice periods was, in his words, absolutely not true. Sit with that phrase for a second. Absolutely not true. That's not diplomatic hedging. That's a direct accusation of factual error, aimed at the CEO of one of the biggest teams on the grid. Now here's the detail that changes how you read this entire dispute. Permane says he knew about Landi wanting to leave in September of last year. Not a couple of months before the announcement, like Brown's letter implied, nearly a full year earlier. And he says he specifically didn't let Landi go until April, at which point Landi served 3 months of gardening leave, which Permane says is exactly what FIA regulations require. So if that timeline is accurate, and Permane is naming specific months on the record, then Brown's central piece of evidence doesn't hold up the way it was presented. And Permane went one step further. He said, quote, "Honestly, to be on this side of it and see that we are operating fairly and within the rules, we put a lot of effort into making sure that we are respecting the regulations." That's a team principle, on the record. Defending his operations integrity against a direct public accusation from a rival executive. This is not a minor sporting disagreement. This is two of Formula One's power players fighting over what the sport's rules actually mean and who gets to decide when they've been broken. Here's the question nobody in the paddock wants to answer out loud. Is Zach Brown exposing a genuine loophole that gives Red Bull an unfair advantage? Or is this a coordinated pressure campaign to force a sale that has nothing to do with sporting integrity and everything to do with weakening a rival on track? Drop your verdict below and hit like if you already know which one it is. Now hold that thought, because this is where the FIA comes back in. Ben Sulayem has confirmed that the FIA is investigating dual-team ownership structures across the grid. That means Brown's letter didn't just create a public relations headache for racing bulls, it created a regulatory review. Whether or not Permain's timeline defense holds up in the court of public opinion, the letter already achieved something concrete. It got the sport's governing body to open the file. And that's exactly why the mechanism here isn't just team versus team anymore. It's a team principle, defending his organization against an executive's public accusation, while a regulatory body decides whether to act on that accusation, regardless of whether the specific claims inside it were accurate. Perman can win the argument about dates and gardening leave clauses and still lose the bigger fight, because the FIA doesn't need every detail to be correct. It just needs a reason to look closer. So follow the chain. A letter gets written, a letter gets leaked, specific claims inside that letter get challenged point by point, on the record, by the person best positioned to know the truth, and yet the investigation proceeds anyway. And there's one more piece that raises the stakes even higher. Over the past weekend, it was reported that Red Bull rejected a bid worth £2.2 billion for Racing Bulls. There's no indication Red Bull is actively trying to sell before any new restrictions come in, but the timing is impossible to ignore. A rejected billion-pound bid, a leaked letter alleging unfair advantage, and an active FIA investigation into dual ownership, all sitting on the table at the same time. You've probably seen teams deny accusations before, but how often does the person doing the denying also hand you the exact month, the exact gardening leave length, and the exact regulation they say they followed? That level of specificity from Permain isn't just a defense. It's a challenge, daring anyone to check the paper trail. So tell me straight, if you were sitting in Red Bull's boardroom right now with a £2.2 billion offer on the table and an FIA investigation already open, do you hold the line and keep Racing Bulls exactly as it is? Or do you start planning for a sale before the regulations force your hand? There's no comfortable answer here. Pick one in the comments. Here's the verdict. Zach Brown's letter was never really about one engineer's gardening leave or one fastest lap point in Singapore. Those were the entry points, the specific, checkable claims designed to get attention. The actual target was always the relationship itself, the idea that Red Bull operating two teams gives it a structural advantage no single team owner can match. And by writing that letter directly to Ben Sulayem instead of picking up the phone, Brown made sure this stopped being a private argument between two executives and became a live regulatory question that the FIA now has to answer, whether or not every fact inside that letter checks out. Alan Permain can be completely right about every date and every clause, and this fight still isn't over. Because once a regulator starts asking questions about a rival's ownership structure, the accuracy of the letter that triggered it stops being the point. Agree or disagree, the comments are the courtroom. And if you think this ends with one podcast interview, you haven't been paying attention, say why in the comments. This story is not over, and when the FIA's investigation actually produces a ruling, you'll want to be here for it. Subscribe, hit like, and until the next one.